Hello everybody, my name is Andrew Dreeben of the group Michael's Secret, and I'm going to present to you all today on our final design for the 2110 competition. So before I get into our actual designs, I wanted to speak to how we hoped that our machine would score based on our testing. We averaged about 57 points during testing, and we had a maximum score of about 97 points. However, we scored significantly lower than this during the competition. The main difference was we weren't testing against other teams, and this proved to be a fatal error on our part. Aside from our final design, we went through a number of design alternatives. Shown here is our first design alternative, which uses the same rack and pinion assembly to raise the Millennium Golf Ball that we used in our final design. Otherwise, though, this machine was a little too simplistic and did not actually meet all of the requirements of the competition. One thing it did use, however, was the arms shown in green, which we ended up actually using to a certain extent in our final design. The idea here was that the arms would be triggered by mouse traps and would fall behind the fleet, which would return them into our zone. Our second design alternative shown here, again, wasn't really feasible for the final competition. It was a little too complex. However, we did take some inspiration from it for our final design. It again uses the same rack and pinion assembly for raising the Millennium Golf Ball. Otherwise, though, it also uses pneumatic actuators, shown in blue, to remove the TIE fighters from our zone, which is something we used in our final design as well. Our third design alternative shown here, again, uses the rack and pinion assembly, but otherwise there aren't many similarities to our final design. The card system shown in blue was a different idea we had here. It is meant to roll down the ramp and ultimately hit the TIE fighter, which would release the two pink arms, which would return the fleet to our zone. However, this was very unstable, we figured, and seemed like it wasn't really a feasible idea to use in our final design. Here we finally have our fourth design alternative. This one was probably our best concept. It uses the pneumatics that are used in our final design. Those are shown in blue. The blue arms will swing out and the pneumatic pumps will knock the TIE fighters out of the zone. It also uses a similar idea for the fleet, where the arms shown in yellow will release on linear bearings, and upon egressing away from the Death Star, these arms will pull the fleet back into our zone. One difference is it uses a scissor lift rather than a rack and pinion to raise the Millennium Golf Ball, but this is good to consider other ideas. We ultimately ended up going with the rack and pinion again. And finally, for torpedoing the Death Star, this uses a similar idea to our final design. The only difference is, in our final design, we used a timer rather than the long arm switch shown here, but essentially what happens is the long arm switch would be triggered by the rotation of the Death Star, and this trigger would allow a ping pong ball to release from the PVC tubing shown here. So here we have our evaluation matrix, which is what we use to determine which of our designs we would use for our final machine. And as you can see, our final machine, design number 5 shown here, which we will discuss in a minute, outscored each of the other 4 designs by at least 6 points. So finally, we will now get into discussing our final design. Here we have a picture of our machine in its untriggered state. And here it is after triggering. And you can see from this view that the most unique feature of our machine is its 2-base system. One base is mounted on top of another, and a pneumatic actuator, which is shown in the back, is used to force the top base forward, which allows for each of the mechanisms to extend out to their appropriate placement on the course. So like I said earlier, and like in a lot of the design alternatives, our machine uses a rack and pinion to raise the Millennium Golf Ball. Again, consistently this would work, and raise our golf ball to a height of 21 inches, giving us the full 10 points. We didn't focus on going for the maximum height, as we figured it would be more fruitful to focus on other aspects of the competition. Shown here is our second subsystem, which is used to both remove the left side TIE fighter and to return the left side fleet into our zone. So the way it works is when the first pneumatic actuator propels the upper base forward, a second pneumatic actuator will actuate and knock the TIE fighter out of the zone. That's shown in silver and has a wood block attached to the front to make sure that it reaches. Secondarily, when the upper base reaches its full extension, the associated force, this associated stopping force, will cause the hinged arms shown in their extended position to fall behind the fleet, and with our egress, which is powered by a motor and pulley system, the fleet will be returned into our zone. So next we have another part of this same subsystem, but for the right side, and you can see the second arm shown here, which is used just like the other two arms in that it is meant to pull the fleet back into our zone. However, on this side we sacrifice the TIE fighter, and so we lose 13 points here. Up next we have our mechanism that we use to torpedo the Death Star, and the way this works is a solenoid set on a timer is used to actuate up and down to release ping pong balls into the Death Star. Setting the timer was difficult because of the variable timing of the Death Star, but this worked pretty consistently. The only problem was that every once in a while the solenoid would release 2 ping pong balls instead of 1 into the Death Star. We actually ran into a number of unforeseen problems during the competition, the first of which being the deployment speed. The main problem here was not the actuation of the base. This actually went adequately fast, but some of the secondary subsystems which were reliant on that initial actuation were a little slower than we would have liked, which allowed other teams to reach, say, the TIE fighter or the fleet before we could. Another associated problem with that was the stability of the arms. At times, because other teams would reach, say, the TIE fighter first, the arms which were used to return the fleet would get caught on other machines, and they both broke or they made our egress impossible and held our machine in place. Also, we completely neglected the second TIE fighter, which should be addressed. And finally, the precision of our torpedoing mechanism was off. We used a timer, which was adequate, but the main problem was that the solenoid used to release the balls sometimes it would release 2 balls instead of just 1, and that was not good. So to address all those problems previously outlined, we have a few solutions. The first of which is to either remove or hinge a portion of the right side arm so that it wouldn't get stuck on other machines. What I'm talking about is, you can see right here, this thinner piece was right over top of the TIE fighter on that side, and if this piece was either removed or hinged so that it wouldn't get caught on other machines, we would have been able to return some of the fleet on this side, and also our machine wouldn't have gotten stuck on our egress. In order to address the problem of the stability and efficiency of the arms used to return the fleet, we maybe could add a guard or some sort of mechatronic trigger to prevent the arms from actuating when the machine was not in use, maybe when we were performing maintenance or something. This way they wouldn't break off. In order to combat the problem of just neglecting the second TIE fighter, we thought of a mechanism that would utilize a mousetrap, and when the mousetrap would trigger when the arm falls on the TIE fighter, and the mousetrap would then swing the TIE fighter out of the zone. In order to fix some of the problems we had with the torpedoing mechanism, we could use a switch rather than a timer. That would be a little more reliable. We could also use a longer wood piece, which you can see in the next slide. If that piece of wood was just a little bit longer, it would prevent multiple balls from being released from the PVC pipe, and only one ball would be released, which would be great. As for the results of the competition, we took 8th place in the aesthetic design voting, which was pretty good. We made it to the 3rd round, which means we had 2 wins. We won. We took 2nd in both of the first 2 rounds, and in the 3rd round we took 4th, which was very disappointing. But that's how it went. Thanks for listening, everybody. Let me know if you have any questions.